Hello and welcome to the Complaint Department. Today we'll be looking at The Last of Us Part 2. I'm a huge fan of The Last of Us and the Uncharted games, and this is without a doubt my most anticipated game of the year. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've had dreams about playing this game for months. I even made a PSN account from Hong Kong so I could download it 12 hours early. However, keep in mind this is the Complaint Department and no game is truly safe. So I put my personal biases aside and tried to look at this game with a very critical eye, and despite the complaints I do have about the game, I was still blown away by the level of polish. When it comes to the narrative-focused shooter, Naughty Dog is just untouchable. But what I find with some of their games is that the narrative can end up sometimes carrying the gameplay. This is absolutely not the case for The Last of Us 2, but as far as the narrative goes, it's a little more complicated. If you're trying to avoid spoilers, this is a good place to check out. If you're just looking for a recommendation, just know that at the end of the day, I love this game, okay? I think that... Oh, hold on, let me get that. Yep. Alright, sorry about that, but it looks like we've encountered an anomaly. Normally I get my fill of dislikes from shitting on games, but this time I think that dislikes will come from defending this one. We've seen this pretty recently. You know, it's surprising how many reviews I've seen lately that neglect to talk about the gameplay nearly as much as the story, and I think that's a pretty big disservice to what they've done here. It's by no means a huge leap ahead of the first game, but there have been some great tweaks and improvements that really help it stand out. There are plenty of reasons why fans are upset at this game, and don't worry, we'll dive into them. But the first thing I want to do is take a deep dive into the gameplay and give it a fair shake. As to be expected, you've got a familiar premise in this one, third-person shooter that heavily rewards stealth, featuring a mix of human soldiers, infected monsters, and sometimes both. The gameplay experience itself is improved from the first one with much better level design and a much more capable main character. The melee combat is totally different. In the first game, you could walk up to a group of 3 enemies and mash square and still make it out alive pretty easily. In Part 2, you now have a dedicated dodge button, which not only works great for dodging arrows or attacks, but especially in melee combat, you need to actively pay attention to enemies' movements and dodge accordingly. It almost feels like, never mind. The levels in this game are much larger and less linear than the first one. The openness of these levels offers you many different ways to play through them because they're filled with interconnected pathways and cracks to slip through. You can now go prone to hide in tall grass or little obstructions in the environment. There are fewer weapons overall, but there's no shortage of different combat options in this game. Now, one of my biggest fears with this game was when I first got to the Boston area that opened up into kind of a pseudo-open world, with a main area to go to and some optional areas to explore for more gear if you want, and I'm thinking, side quests? In a story-driven game like this? It reminded me of Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, which had a very experimental section of the game where it opens up into like an open world style map with like 20 different optional areas to complete. The openness was refreshing, sure, but it took its toll on the pacing of the game. The length of the game also suffered because you were in this open world area for about half of the game if you did everything. We see this idea brought into Last of Us 2, and I'm getting pretty worried thinking that it might be a shorter game than the first one, even though the playtime might end up looking similar because of how much time you spend in this one area. By the time I finished the game, those concerns were completely squashed. One thing that just can't be overstated about The Last of Us Part 2 is it's a massive game. When it comes to a single player game you're paying $60 for, you absolutely get your money's worth. When I played the game, I went fairly slowly, taking in every detail, exploring every little house. I was also on the hardest difficulty, which had me repeating a few sections over and over for a while, and my final playtime clocked in at 30 hours. And in my eyes, the story never felt like it was dragging. I was completely absorbed in the characters, and that feeling of dreading what's coming next always compelled me through the game. Survivor mode, the hardest difficulty, was a great experience. What really blew me away was the AI, which was some of the best and most perceptive I've seen in a while. If you're crawling by and you leave your shoelace exposed for half a second, they start alerting everybody in the room. Finding a good amount of ammo and resources is a wet dream. Sections on Survivor will start you off with 3 handgun bullets, a Molotov, and a brick, and then throw 20 enemies at you and say good luck. When I recorded footage for this game, I went back through it on moderate, visiting all the same places, getting the same amount of loot, and I found that nearly every gun was fully loaded, and I had a ton of craftable items. I think both modes can be enjoyable, but you need to ask yourself what you want from this game. Moderate difficulty opened up so many more options just by nature of the amount of resources you get to play around with. Survivor is a much more tense and ultimately more rewarding experience, where every single bullet counts and you feel fantastic when you finally clear out an area. Although, there were a few areas where after trying for nearly an hour and a half, I eventually said fuck it and just ran through. I didn't turn on invisibility, but I'm still ashamed of myself. Just ask the people I was playing with though, I was suffering. Some of these levels on the hardest mode, if you expend a lot of your resources early, you can very easily find yourself in near impossible scenarios. Thankfully, Last of Us 2 goes above and beyond with the amount of options it gives you to set the perfect difficulty experience for you. You can individually tune how much damage Ellie takes, how perceptive enemies are, how common resources are found, if you want your ally to be brain dead or fucking John Wick, all without the fear of missing a certain trophy, because you can platinum the game on any difficulty. This is a plus in that really any player can snag the platinum trophy without having to be a top tier gamer, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bitter that I suffered through that difficulty for no reward. You look at the Uncharted games, which do a fantastic job of rewarding you. In both of these games, you get points for beating them on certain difficulties or getting a lot of collectibles, and in Uncharted, you can unlock certain weapons to use anytime, different gameplay modifiers, render modes, infinite ammo. The Last of Us 1 already did a shitty job of rewarding you, where the best thing you could buy was a black and white filter or a Jak and Daxter shirt for Ellie. In part 2, you have concept art and a model viewer, and that's it. I mean, you could definitely make the argument that for a game like this, infinite ammo would just be too good and take away from the tense experience. I would argue, I just beat the game on fucking survival. I think I earned a break. I already got the experience. If anything, this will make the game more replayable. But you know who else would disagree with you? The developers themselves. They seem pretty content with giving you cheat codes for free anyways at the start of the game. I'm of course talking about the extensive list of accessibility options. These options are a pretty tricky thing to cover because I think it's fantastic that there are so many different options for really anyone to beat the game, regardless if you have any kind of disability. If you're visually impaired, you can turn on text-to-speech or make the HUD more clear. They also give you Thief Mode, which makes all the enemies red and all the players blue, which is a godsend for some visually impaired people. If you're hearing impaired, there are the best subtitle options I've ever seen in a game. Another great disability that's covered is if you like anime, you can turn it to Japanese. Most of these options are great, but with a few of these, you gotta wonder if they're really meant to help people with impairments, or if they're just giving you cheat codes for free. Let's take a look at the combat accessibility options, which include hostages never escaping, allies never getting caught, enemies never flank and can barely hit you, your dodge now makes you borderline invincible, completely turning off weapon sway, or everyone's favorite, invisibility while prone. Now I can appreciate the intention of trying to make the game playable for everyone, but you run that risk of them ultimately negatively impacting someone's experience if they get a little too adventurous in the options menu. There are a few of these that I think really should have just been post-game rewards, like the slow motion aiming, or this little scan you can do that'll show you all nearby items and enemies. A few of these are just great quality of life options, like automatically picking up items, or this little arrow that can show you where to go so you don't miss out on optional caveats. But to be honest, this game really does suffer from a lack of replayability. Unless you really want to get the Platinum Trophy, which involves finding every single collectible in the game, there's really no reason to revisit this game aside from playing your favorite sections over again. Sadly, there's no factions mode like the first game, but Naughty Dog has said they're cooking up something good. We'll see how much that costs. The post-game kind of reminds me of in Half-Life Alyx, that it's just a missed opportunity. When you have such a finely tuned and polished gameplay experience, you want to keep playing and the devs don't utilize it to its full potential. Even something like a simple survival mode, some gameplay changes, some challenge modes, even a speedrun mode. Although Half-Life Alyx does have mods now, I wouldn't hold your breath for this one. One of my favorite changes this game makes is to its upgrade system. In the first game you had 5 different abilities you could upgrade multiple times. In this one you have 5 different skill trees that really get creative with the way they change your character, and they really lend themselves to a certain playstyle. You've got a stealth skill tree, a combat skill tree, a skill tree for your craftable items. It's a great new system, and another upgrade system that was changed was the weapon upgrades. You actually physically see your character take apart and rework your weapons when you upgrade them, which is very flashy, but I don't think I like it as much as the first game. For example, let's look at the pistol. In both of these games you can upgrade the accuracy, the recoil, the capacity, and the fire rate. The difference being in the first game you could upgrade each one of these attributes multiple times. In the second game you can do them only once. Weapons that have a total of 7 upgrades in the original will probably end up with like 3 in this one. Another complaint is kind of specific to the survivor mode playthrough, in which a lot of these upgrades become worthless. Because of the scarcity of ammo, certain upgrades like recoil reduction for the shotgun, or capacity for the shotgun, or a burst fire option for the assault rifle, which oftentimes you don't even have 3 bullets to burst fire with, and especially capacity options where you wouldn't even dream of having a full magazine. You end up spending a lot of parts on things you don't need. I understand this complaint really only matters for the survivor mode playthrough, but I think the mode is the best way to play the game, so I think it's valid. Alright. Do we really need to talk about the story? I mean, come on, we've got this far. The review has done so well so far. Thanks for watching. Go follow me on Twitter. We could just call it quits right here, okay? No? Alright, let's do it. I want to make it very clear that I'm speaking entirely through my experience and what I thought of the game. A lot of people are going to think differently. A lot of people might disagree, but I think that's the beauty of a story like this, is that it gets so many people talking. If this was just a simple cookie cutter story about Joel and Ellie fucking up zombies, I would be vastly more disappointed than what we ended up with. It's a story that a lot of people are rightfully pissed off about, and not just because of Joel's death. A lot of people are pissed because they killed the main character, but you need to understand that this guy had it coming. You do not just commit an atrocity like that in the first game and not have the consequences come back at you. Joel killed a lot of innocent people and he needed to pay the consequences for it. The bulk of this story really relies on your ability to accept and understand the motivations behind the people that killed Joel. But we'll get more into that later. One thing I really want to point out and applaud is the devs for a very well executed bait and switch. I was one of the lucky few to avoid spoilers for this game, and I did not see the death coming, especially with how obnoxiously they hinted as to Dina dying instead of Joel. In the initial story trailers and gameplay, they're talking about Joel and Ellie settling down and Ellie getting romantic feelings towards Dina. And then they talk about a very traumatic experience happening in which Ellie is seeking revenge. And in one of the trailers, you see Joel appearing in a later section only for him to be replaced by Jesse in the final game. In a lot of ways, this kind of reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 2 back in the day, in which the only pre-release coverage they showed was gameplay of Solid Snake. In the final game, you play as Snake for about an hour before you switch to Raiden. And this was done because everybody wanted to see how much of a badass Snake was, and this can really only be highlighted when you're looking at him in a third person. The bait and switch they did with The Last of Us 2 is nowhere near as ambitious as Metal Gear Solid 2, but I can still appreciate it pretty much. I see a lot of people complaining that this is false advertising or that there was some kind of change in development, someone took over and changed the story. That's just not true. That's your typical Redditor tinfoil hat opinion. I personally love when devs go out of their way to try to subvert our expectations. It's a practice I want to see a lot more. So we have our premise. Abby kills Joel, and Ellie sets out on revenge, and by the time we finally meet Abby, after building it up for 10 hours, the game pulls another 180, and you play the next 10 hours as Abby and learn about her side of the story. This is what ultimately pisses off so many people, forcing you to play as the character you hate the most. But I'm not gonna lie, and sometimes I feel like I'm one of the only people that feels this way, but I actually really fell in love with Abby throughout her flashbacks and really connected with her as a character. I understood what she was doing. Her father was the surgeon trying to do his best for humanity, and he was killed by Joel. Abby's revenge was justified just as much as Ellie's revenge, if not more. And that's really the cruel parallel in that we're trying to avenge our father figure that killed Abby's father figure. Throughout Ellie's sequence, the people you kill on your way to finding Abby are all part of the organization that Abby belongs to. And so you'll see characters on Abby's side that you brutally murdered as Ellie. And it really starts to paint this picture of a very unjust and cruel massacre because of a very deserved death. You know, I'm saying this and I can feel the dislikes building up in the comments and it just fills me with power. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm telling you exactly how I felt when I was playing through the game, and that's that I was kind of rooting for Abby a little bit. And I'm not being disingenuous because I want to farm dislikes, okay? As much as I want to, I'm being honest. So we play as Abby for 10 hours, we learn about all of these characters, including Yara and Lev, we empathize with her. If you still hate Abby and you're still pissed off at her, then buckle up because the devs are about to force you to try to kill your favorite character. I have no doubt this must be one of the most infuriating sections for you dedicated fans to play. For the last 10 hours of the story, you've been wondering how this scene will possibly play out. Both of these characters deserve to die at this point, and in the end, nothing happens. Abby arrives at the theater pent up with rage to avenge nearly all of her slain friends, including Mel, who was pregnant, and her lover, realizing that letting Ellie live ultimately caused all of this in the first place.
Don't ever let me see you again.
This decision by this character is one that I just simply don't agree with. Looking back on the whole Abby segment, it's clear that the events with Yara and Lev are designed to reform Abby, but there's just so much conflict in the writing that we can't reach this goal. You're trying to tell me that this whole time was for Abby to reform, but she shoots Jesse and Tommy in the head and is about to gladly stab a pregnant woman in the throat, and Lev goes, "Abby, no, stop." and all animosity leaves her heart and she lets the source of all of her problems live. I just cannot buy that. The fact that no one dies in this scene is just crazy to me. But really, that's one of the only scenes I have a problem with, which means I didn't really have a problem with the ending of this game. The ending of this game is without a doubt the most polarizing part, in which Ellie pulls the old Naughty Dog special, in which the main character commits genocide only to spare the one person that put them on this murderous rampage. I can totally understand the outrage behind this one, but I have less of a problem with the scene than I do with the theater scene. The final fight scene, and really the whole game, are reliant on the player empathizing with Abby. If the player's watching Abby get fucked up and enslaved by these rattlers and going, yeah, she deserves it, fuck that bitch, then there's no way they're gonna feel any kind of sympathy for Abby, which is really what the devs wanted the player to feel at this moment. It's what I felt. When Ellie finally tracks down Abby, she is in such a miserable state, and it's so clear how much she suffered, despite letting Ellie live multiple times, that she ultimately can't bring herself to kill her in the end. Another factor that I think contributes to Ellie not killing Abby is Lev, and I think the devs could have used Lev to help us understand what Ellie was thinking. When Abby's being choked by Ellie, I think it would have gone a long way if Ellie looked over at Lev and sort of saw herself in the same way that Abby sees Lev and thinks of the pain that she felt when she lost Joel and how she would just be passing on that heartache. You know, it's just my dumb idea, but I think more should have been done to show the player why Ellie spared Abby. Some people have called for multiple endings. I feel a little mixed on this idea. I think a bad ending where Ellie kills Abby and then Lev wakes up and starts screaming and crying, and then Lev tries to kill Ellie and then he's killed, to really hammer it in that this cycle is just continuing because of his choice. It sounds over the top and unnecessarily brutal, but are you really going to try and tell me that that wouldn't fit the theme of this game? So that's what I think about the narrative. You know, I think it's a fine story that's really only held back by some very questionable decisions from characters, like the whole theater scene, and also how Joel actively saved and trusted total strangers in this world that has only given him pain. I have a really hard time believing that Joel would do that. But yeah, that's what I think. I think ultimately it's a game that's carried by its gameplay. It's weird to say that in a modern Naughty Dog game, I enjoyed the gameplay more than the story, but anyways, that's how I feel. If you disagree, let me know. It's something that I want to talk about and hear multiple opinions on, as long as you're not one of those entitled fucks that signed that change.org petition to remake the story of the game just because you didn't like it. It just blows my mind that 50,000 people are trying to make the developers create a product that is catered to them rather than what the creator wanted to do, or the story that they wanted to tell. Gamer entitlement in 2020 just never ceases to impress. But this has been the complaint department. I know I kind of got a little excited there, but when it's something you're passionate about, you just can't help but raise your voice. Let me know what game you want me to complain about next, and I'll see you next time on the Complaint Department.